Lead NFL draft analyst for the 33rd team. It's Kyle Krabs joining us here on the show. Kyle, thanks for the time first and foremost. And we'll start right out of the chute here with one of your latest mock drafts in which you have the Bills at pick 30 taking Iowa State corner Darien Porter. And I know Porter's young at the position, former wide receiver. Are you hearing that he's kind of climbing boards? Because the resume isn't deep at corner. I know he's got physical traits. There's no denying that. But do you see this as a guy that could climb into the late day one conversation?
I think so. I think the momentum is here based off of a guy that checked in just short of 6'3" and has a monster wingspan. He's got over 33-inch arms. So that's a really rare blend when you consider he also ran a 4.3 flat. So the traits are great, right? But as you mentioned, he was a wide receiver all the way through high school, his first year at Iowa State. So he's still relatively new to playing corner, but you see how he leverages, particularly in zone, and utilizes that length and that athleticism and really rare transitional quickness for such a tall athlete to play on the perimeter to kind of close and compress throwing windows from zone. And you think about how that could potentially pair with Buffalo's secondary and obviously Sean McDermott and the job that they do, which is as good of any as far as spacing the back seven with their zone coverages and their development at the position with what they've done with Christian Benford, who just got rewarded with a big time contract. I think it's a really exciting cost controlled fit too at a premium position where I know Dane Jackson is a familiar player, so they probably feel good about what that floor can look like. But you want to have a potential boom with a pair of corners that have really rare traits. Benford and Porter would be it.
Yeah, where does Darien Porter fit with the hierarchy of the cornerback class this year? I mean, is he one of the, I mean, how many corners you have going before? I didn't check I forgot to check the mock draft of how many corners went ahead of him because I wanted to do a little deeper dive on what he was. But how far down the depth chart in cornerback does he go on your list?
I think he has a solid chance to be the fourth corner off the board. I think you have Will Johnson from Michigan, who was a consensus guy going back to the summertime, and he missed a little bit of time this year. You obviously have Travis Hunter, whether he's going to play wide receiver or corner. And then you have Jahdae Barron, who is a hot name at Texas as a guy who can play inside, outside. He said at his pro day, some teams were asking about playing safety. He was a nickel guy before this past year and moved outside and had a lot of ball production. Two of the names up on that list, Benjamin Morrison and Savon Revel, are really talented guys, but both of them had season-ending injuries where I think that may eventually hurt those guys as far as the comfortability with the medicals. It was a hip for Morrison and an ACL for Revel in September. So the injuries at that spot, Porter being the guy that tested really well. He's put his best tape out here recently. He doesn't have the injury concern. I think him and Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, for me, would be in the running for CB4, CB5.
Yeah, and let's talk about those injury concerns a little bit because I know Will Johnson had a turf toe also, then a hamstring here, hasn't really tested. For a team like the Bills, who you can unequivocally argue could use a day one starter at corner to line up opposite Benford outside, teams probably don't want to mess with Revel or Morrison. I'm wondering about Will Johnson, too. Obviously not as severe an injury, but he did only play 6 games last year, and some of this other stuff has lingered into the pre-draft process. Where are people on Will Johnson?
I definitely think and feel as though Will has lost some momentum in his projection because people are waiting for, okay, we want to see the athletic profile. It was the lingering issues. It feels a little bit to me like what happened with Derek Stingley when he was coming out, where he had like the phenomenal freshman season at LSU. The next 2 seasons with him weren't his best ball, and he was kind of always fighting something, it felt like. And then there was the debate between him and Sauce Gardner in that draft class. They both end up being very talented and very impactful NFL players. I think Will be fine, but this whole pre-draft process is risk assessment, right? And you're looking for reasons to cross guys off your list because of perceived risk. And for Will to have had the turf toe and then it was a hamstring or something else that prevented him from working out at the pro day. It's just has not been the complete process of checking the box relative to other guys and what they've been able to do at the All-Star events and the NFL Combine and going through the interview process as well.
So when you break this down at the top of the draft, and so much of, when you get down, you're taking, the third or fourth or fifth corner off the board, even if it's a guy you've really felt like is a great value, a lot of it depends on what happens at the top of the draft. How do you see the top of the draft falling? Tennessee seems to be a little bit tight-lipped about what they're going to do with their number 1 overall pick. And then, of course, Cleveland and the Giants are right behind them. How do you see any movement happening with those top 3 or 4 or 5 picks?
I think you've seen some of the urgency go where Tennessee went out and they spent in free agency and they gave Dan Moore a really big contract to be a tackle, and then they bring in Zeitler to be a guard for them. That kind of spells to me like we're going to pick a quarterback with that number 1 overall pick. But I do agree that they've been kind of coy about it, and maybe some of that is, could they coax a Godfather offer from the Giants that they just simply couldn't refuse if New York got super desperate? And I think the Giants have done their part to kind of take some of that pressure off by signing Winston and Russell Wilson in free agency. So I think you'll probably see fairly static through the top 5. How it goes from there is going to be really fascinating because you're going to have some scheme-specific type of fits where teams maybe want to get aggressive and go up and get a guy, but I'm sure most teams would probably like to slide down and get some more day 2 draft capital just because that feels like where the best value and depth is in this year's class.
Yeah. Wanted to go over some prospects as you have an extensive number of scouting reports up at the 33rd team. And since we're talking corners, this was a guy that I kind of wanted to get your take on, Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. Has played outside, has also played in the nickel. Some people project him as a nickel only in the NFL. Do you think he can be more than that at the NFL level?
I think he can. I think he's got a really, really pleasant blend of traits where he's a former 100-meter guy. You saw that speed at the combine. He ran in the 4.3s, only 5'9 3/4, but that size is offset a little bit by he's actually above the 50th percentile for his wingspan, despite being that stature. So that helps him a little bit. And man, he's really feisty in press coverage. I see some Byron Murphy in his game as an NFL corner where he tackles. He's not afraid to insert, and because of his height, he actually has some natural leverage that he's able to provide as well. So I think the only knock that I have on him is the stature and how it might get impacted against playing against big-bodied X-receivers that can kind of post you up when you're playing in isolation against him. But he's played a full coverage matrix as far as playing a lot of cover 1, playing on an island on the outside. But he's got really quick transitions because he's built low to the ground. It's a really fun mix of traits.
Give us a little bit of your opinion about, Bills are, the deep defensive tackle group in this draft. The Bills have been mocked a ton of defensive tackles over the last couple of weeks. Zeek Biggers from Georgia Tech may be on the board for Buffalo at 30.
Well, he'll be a little bit later, probably.
Maybe a little later too. But give us some your take on Zeek Biggers from Georgia Tech.
I think he's a really interesting developmental type player where, as a player who's pushing 320, he had some nice lower body explosiveness at the combine. And I think you see that on his tape with some of the linear reps that he have. I do think he is more of a linear athlete. And for a guy that's probably going to be an A-gap defender at the next level, it's not the end of the world, right? You have your space you're responsible for, and you're responsible for keeping guys like, if it was Buffalo, Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano, you keep those guys clean so they can flow to the football. He's got enough size to do that. I think there's some leverage, consistency things with him that he can really aspire to get better at, and it will help him be a more impactful player in the A-gaps. But explosive linear athlete that's 320 and is a load to move when he stays down on his pads is exactly what you're looking for. And those guys aren't in super high demand, but every team needs them. And I think it's going to play in his favor when it comes down to the draft weekend. Probably, I would imagine sometime on day 3.
Yeah, I was impressed with how many tackles that guy's made with one hand. Really strong hands.
Yeah, he's one of those guys too. I mean, he's listed. He's 6'6".
Yeah, no, he's a big guy
and 320 plus. And guys like that get a lot of opportunity because that size is such a weapon, and you can only coach so much, and a guy with those kind of tools is going to give him a chance.
Well, and to your guys' point as well, I know you just showed one of the blocked kicks. He had 4 blocked kicks as well, so there's like an added bonus special teams value for a guy that's that tall and that long, but he jumped 34 inches, so like he can get up.
Yeah,
and that 4 block kicks I think speaks for itself. So you're talking a little added bonus to put him in one of those A gaps on field goal and potentially get a chance to block some kicks and have some special teams value, which you can't really say for a lot of perceived A gap defenders.
Yeah. Many believe, and we're probably in this boat, that the Bills have to help their defense up front and on the back end, primarily at corner, but safety could use some depth as well, maybe a future frontline player in time. So they're probably addressing safety somewhere, day 2, day 3. And I got to say, I know Kevin Winston gets all the pub at Penn State, and he's coming off an injury, so there's something to figure out there. But Jaylen Reed is a guy whose tape I like an awful lot. Seems to be around the ball a lot. Good anticipator in terms of where things are headed, reads plays. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse player as far as the responsibilities. And the injury to Winston, I think, actually kind of expanded his responsibility even more for a guy who could play up on the second level, could play split field coverages, not afraid to insert and attack against the run. I like the physicality and the length that he plays with as a sufficient level athlete, and gets by with the athleticism, but it's the instincts for him that I think is one of the better qualities. So anytime you get these bigger bodied safeties and 6'1", 210 in that ballpark as far as size, depending on where his actual playing weight is, those guys that are aggressive and can get downhill, but also have enough to give you sufficient spacing on the back end. It's kind of like the A-gap defenders we just talked about. They're not considered a premium position, but I don't think it's a coincidence that most really effective defenses at the league end up having those guys that can give you quality play at that spot. So I think he really helped himself this year with his play, just because Winston going down kind of forced him to take more of a leadership role in that secondary.
Well, the Bills have got a really excellent running back stable, but there's some running backs and you're talking about the Bills who may take one of these guys as developmental, or just because they always seem to have a running back in the draft. You've got like Jordan James, Dylan Sampson, Jaydon Blue. Give us a little thumbnail on the best one of these guys that you think is maybe available.
If Jaydon Blue could get the ball security stuff under control, I think he has the most electric profile of the players. He doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires, and he can absolutely fly. He ran a 4.38 with a 1.52 10-yard split, but lost 4 fumbles on barely 200 carries since 2022. So he's a home run play waiting to happen. He's slippery, but the ball security and then the profile as far as what do you have in the passing game, can you trust him in protection? Those are the kinds of things for a young back. You got to earn the trust of the coach, right? And you got to take care of the football and you got to protect the quarterback. So I think in a very, very deep running back class, despite how dynamic and explosive he is, I think that may work against his favor a little bit, but whoever gets their hands on him is definitely going to be hoping and betting that we can take care of the ball security stuff, because if you do, he has hold your breath speed in the open field. He's really electric.
Yeah, home run ability for sure. I know you also do a Dolphins podcast, Kyle, so maybe give us a sense on our AFC East brethren here. They got a lot to fix. Safety is a cavernous hole for them. They could probably use some help for Zach Sealer on the defensive interior a little bit. And offensive line still sticking out there like a sore thumb, especially if Teron Armstead, we don't know what's going on there. So where do you see the Dolphins going, at least in round 1? Knowing the tackle class is thinner, do you think they jump on that early?
I think they really like what they saw from Patrick Paul, the second-round draft choice from the 24 class at left tackle. There were times where he got put into action at right tackle when Armstead would dress, and Austin Jackson missed the entire second half of the season. He got hurt on the last play in the second Buffalo game. And when he went down, they had no ability to run the football. And you saw Patrick Paul try to step in there in some spurts. And I mean, he played his entire career at left tackle at Houston. And when he went over to the right side, he looked like a guy who was trying to play with his other hand and foot up and try to figure everything out. So I think they'll probably, if Armstead does not come back, they will look for probably some young competition / depth / a swing tackle type player. But I would say one of the guard spots is the more vacant. They signed James Daniels in free agency, who should be a really good fit for them. Still kind of in the prime of his career, although he is coming off of an injury this past season. So I would look for a guard probably on day 2. Defensive tackle, would not be surprised if they don't end up double dipping in this draft class because of how deep it is. And it's Zach Sealer, and they brought back Benito Jones and not much else working there. But I wouldn't be surprised if corner is where they end up going in the first round with Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron. They moved on from Kendall Fuller after one season in free agency. So they have Jalen Ramsey. They brought back Kader Coe, who is a restricted free agent. That other cornerback spot for them, they like to draft those quote unquote premium positions early, which would be your quarterback, your wide receiver, your offensive tackle, your pass rushers, and your corners. And I think that's probably where you have a likely intersection of value on the board and what the Dolphins need.
Yeah, I know they haven't been happy with Cam Smith. It was their second-round pick a couple of years ago. He hasn't really developed into a frontline starter. So, yeah, maybe that's the way they go. Kyle, thanks very much for the time. If we don't talk to you before the draft, enjoy it. Otherwise, we'll catch up with you down the line here in the offseason.
That sounds great. It was great talking some ball with you guys, and I appreciate you for having me on.